Welcome you very warmly to our evening, which was organised by a Stroud Wellbeing Group, which is linked also to the Gloucester Health Hub and the People's Health Alliance as well. So I think, you know, we're part of a big movement, and this evening what we've planned, as you saw from the programme, is we'll begin with a talk by Patsy, and then we will have a break with some food which has been kindly brought by different people, and then afterwards we'll have a World Cafe discussion about how to go forward and what we would like really to do. So there's lots of opportunity for everybody to have a say and get involved. And we're starting now and we aim to finish at 9, so we have to sort of be a little bit disciplined with the time as well, because obviously one can extend things very easily. So I'll try and keep time in that way as well. And because there's also some expenses involved, I've got a little collection at the end. So when you go out, you can leave a contribution to help us cover the costs. So I'd like to start, first of all, we're actually meeting here in the St. Luke's Therapy Centre, and I've asked Pia to just say a few words about St. Luke's and what is happening here, first of all.
Okay, so probably many of you already know St. Luke's, and so this is going to be very familiar what I say to you, but go a little bit of the history. St. Luke's were NHS medical practice. It was one of the first small practices to close when all of that began 6 years ago now, 5-6 years ago. And what really happened was that the partners that worked here needed to retire and they couldn't find GPs to take over the practice, and so we had to lose our contract with the NHS and this place closed down. At that point it was there was doctors here, anthroposophical doctors, nurses, and of course an admin staff, and that was all paid for by the NHS. And then there was on the other side of the building therapists working, so there was a whole therapeutic process of therapy. The sort of holistic way of looking at health was already present then, and there was therapists working here, seeing the patients privately. And I'm going to talk about a little bit how we support that then and now. And then it closed down, and then the therapists got together with a couple of doctors and thought and the trust as well, and thought what do we do with this? And we developed basically St. Luke's Therapy Centre out of that. The building was purpose-built for healing, and it's owned by the St. Luke's Trust. There are now 2 doctors and 20 therapists working here. As you come into the building, you can see the whole list of what we offer here. Come in. We have right from the start developed St. Luke's as a community of practitioners working together, so we meet monthly and all decisions are made together. We collectively sign year-long tenancies for renting the rooms with the trust, so we basically commit to a year at a time, signing these tenancies. And we also have, knowing of course now everything is private and people have to pay for it, we have a patient therapy fund, and that was also present when it was a NHS GP practice, and that time it paid for the therapies, or partly paid for the therapies. So we basically fundraise for the patient therapy fund, and people on low income can apply for having supports, part of their fee paid by the patient therapy fund. So there's a way we try to sort of support the community that is there. And then of course we have this lovely community room that we rent out for events, to also have other ways for the community to be present at St. Luke's. So I think that's probably what I need to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I would like to welcome Patsy, who will speak to us on the theme of love, loss and lockdown. She is a grieving counsellor, and she's written a book about her daughter who died and the experience she had to go through. And so she will speak tonight about her work and her approach, and will be opportunity to ask questions as well during that time. So a very warm welcome to you, Patsy.
Thank you. It's great to see you here. Thank you so much for coming. And I'm happy to see familiar faces as well. There's one or two that I don't know yet. I'm a bereavement counsellor, and I based myself... oh, yes, I forgot we're being filmed. At Longfield Hospice, where I organise and run and facilitate writing through grief groups with up to 8 people in each group. And I've only been doing it for a year, so it's a beautiful, new, rich experience. And it blows me away every time. I am quite nervous on the first session because you never know who's going to walk in the door. You don't know quite what their losses is or are. And they come in just terrified of who else might be in the group. And so they sit down very nervously, and gradually over the hour and a half, as they start to feel more comfortable and they listen to each other and they hear people's stories and tales, and it's like, oh wow, I know that one. Yes, I felt that. And you can feel the tension in the room just dropping and subsiding. And Longfield also have decided to offer lunch because it greatly enhances the friendships and the bonds that are made between the group. So they stay on for lunch. And that's when I take my leave. So fantastic. And Longfield are really doing quite innovative things. So that's part of what I do. So I'm going to talk about love and loss in lockdown, and I hope that there's no something in the way. So I'm going to start by, I'm going to read some notes, partly, because I want to make sure I say what I want to say. And I'm hoping to offer this evening an understanding of what loss is and how it affects each and every one of us during the course of our lives. I will then link the subject of loss to the recent, what's being called lockdown. What's it called? Lockdown, yes. And how fear managed to creep into so many people's lives and the impact of that. So I would suggest that there may be a place for your question as we go along, but I suspect the questions will come at the end because one or two things may just tweak your own sense of your own story, and in which case let's leave them to the end. We do have to close this section, this section of the programme by 10 to 7, Bernard tells me. So, and I've got a clock here, so I'll have my eye on it. But what we could do is if there are any other questions, we could bring them into later on, sitting around a table. And does that sound all right, Bernard? So, my greatest loss, arguably the greatest loss of my life, has been the death in 2013 of my younger daughter, Jasmine. I'm not going to say too much about the whole grief experience, but one of the things that helped me through the grief was writing letters to her. And it brought her close to me, and I wrote to her through my sorrow, through my despair, through my sense of guilt, because I decided that I was a failed mother. I should have kept her alive. I could have done more, said more. That's always present in grief, the guilt. Despondency and anger, which actually was more like rage. Pure, utter rage. How dare you die? How dare the doctors and the nurses not keep you alive? How dare you die so young? Just how dare you? And then out came the bottom of my well was when I touched base with God. And I said, if there was a God, or is a God, surely you don't allow these things to happen. That's how my mind was going. So I used to take myself off to the lake, because I live within walking distance of Woodchester, and I'd go early in the morning when there was nobody there. Come on in. Now we need to make sure there's enough chairs for people. And I would wail and thrash about by the edge of the water. And the fisherman, I didn't see a fisherman next door, but he was very quietly fishing. He just ran off, as you can imagine. Who'd want to hear this absolute nutter of a woman, raving and ranting. And of course I didn't speak to anyone on the way because I didn't want to meet anyone. So, but the rage and the anger that came up it shifted the guilt somewhat. And I also did a beautiful guilt ceremony with a friend of mine who's done quite a few very simple ceremonies, which may come up in a question at the end. Because what grief does bring up is guilt. And that is so toxic because it literally takes away our sense of who we are, our self-worth. It can eat away at us. And I defy anyone in this room to say, I don't have any guilt, I don't feel guilty about anything. I'll leave that open. So the grief changed, and because of writing, I found that the spaces in between, I always suggest to people that they write or keep a journal of the grief and what it's doing. Because one of the really scary things about grief is it's so unpredictable. 1 minute you're down, and then the next you shift and something changes, and then the next day you're down again. So it's very unpredictable, and people find that very, very challenging. I'm not surprised. So I then found it quite hard to let the book go, because I'd written over about 6 years to her. And to send it out into the world felt like another grief in a way, I've got to let this go now, and how will it impact my relationship with Jasmine, my daughter? Will I feel her less? Because she came back. She came back after 4 months, and I was just sitting quietly with her photograph on the sill and candle, and I felt this presence. It's the only way I can describe it, in the room. And the light was brighter. And then I felt a very, very slight brush across my cheek. And of course, I started sobbing. So that was the beginning. What did I do then? Of course, the mind kicks in, doesn't it? And the mind said, don't be so silly, that wasn't your daughter. Of course it wasn't. Do you really believe in such things? Well, I think I did. I sort of did. So I talked myself out of the fact that it was my daughter who wanted to make her presence felt and known to me. And then she came again. And then there were more signs. And a picture of hers, she's a painter, dropped off the wall right outside my bedroom. And I heard this thud. And I thought, and the nail was still there and everything. So I thought, Jasmine's doing this again. And then another painting of hers fell off the wall. I'm glad it didn't have glass on it. And I'm writing about this as well. And then through the telepathy that was developing, once I trusted it, I heard Jasmine say to me, Mum, you must write this down. It will help a lot of people who are grieving. Well, when you get your instructions from the other side, you have to do that. And Jasmine used to write herself. And so she said, I'll help you, Mum. So there we are. That's kind of how the book was birthed. And the other factor is that where love is present, grief is far more likely to knock at the door. In other words, there's a close attachment there. I wonder if we need permission from someone else to grieve. I leave you with that. Our culture doesn't encourage it. Instead, what is usually admired is what? You tell me. Yes?
Get on with it.
Get on with it.
Get
Yeah.
over it.
Get over it. Stoicism. Be strong. Well, I've done all that in the past over other losses, like a divorce. And I had to carry on because I was a busy bee with 2 girls, earning my living, our living. But I couldn't do it this time. But I did go and see the hospice chaplain. He's Irish. So I think you can imagine what an Irish chaplain might say to me. So I went to see him just to say goodbye, actually. And I'd like to just read you the letter about my visit to him. So this is, it's recent. It's 2 weeks after Jasmine died. Sweetheart, I doubt I will ever stop thinking about you. Have you safely left this world and crossed over into the next? I have one last appointment with the chaplain, and after that I shall wend my way home. I'm not looking forward to getting back, knowing that you will not be there. I'm just about functioning, though not yet firing on all cylinders. I'm still wrapped in a bubble of shock, frozen and numb inside. It feels weird going to the hospice without you being there. Muppet, my dog, stays in the car. The chaplain is at reception waiting for me. On our way to the chapel, where we used to sit, we pass your room, and I find myself wondering who is occupying it now. Just then a tall, rather thin man comes out, closes the door behind him, brushing away a tear. I tell the chaplain how dreadful I feel. Of course you do, oh, Irish accent. Of course you do, he says. And when I say how uncertain I am of any future without you, he nods. And then we talk about grief. Let it rip, he advises. This pain is love. Allow the grief to unfold in whatever way it wants to. There is a healthy pain associated with grieving that will dissolve in time. However, when grief is held back and not expressed, the emotions stay locked in the body and can cause physical and emotional illness. So allow yourself to feel everything. With his encouragement, I let go a little more. The knot in my stomach slowly uncurls, and I cry and cry. I shall be sad saying goodbye to the chaplain, and although he says I can come back any time, I know I won't. We are done now. I needed to be reminded that it is healthy to grieve, because in my family, we never showed our feelings, let alone talked about them. I imagine it was the same for some of you here. If anything, feelings were seen as weakness. My parents were the war generation, so stoicism and a stiff upper lip were very much the order of the day. As an army officer, my father was well trained in this, though it must have been difficult for him at times, as he was a deeply sensitive man, a poet and a writer. Whenever I went to stay, it was always Dad who picked flowers from the garden and arranged them in a vase by my bed. I have a lot to think about on my way home. There's no rush. I find myself appreciating the beauty of the crisp white covering on the ground, the frosted branches of trees, and the sense of stillness that comes in winter when everything slows down. Muppet sleeps most of the way home and just wakes when we turn into my road. How will we manage without Jasmine, Muppet? He looks up at me and barks. I swear that dog is nearly human. Although his eyes are clouding over with cataracts, he is still lively, and his presence is enormously comforting. I am so glad to have him. And so it went on. Ours is not an easy culture in which to mourn a loss. It's very, very easy to feel terribly alone. A person in grief looks sort of normal, but they are anything but. Let's compare our culture with the indigenous people. The indigenous believe that grieving is a sacred rite of passage, just like that of death and birth. In 2006, I spent 2 weeks with the Shuar tribe in Ecuador. It's a story as to how I got there, but it's in there. For them, a grief-stricken person is never left alone. Their mourning is supported and honoured. In fact, I happened to be there when they had a grief ceremony. Not by chance, is it? We walked through the jungle for about half an hour until we came to a clearing without trees. It was up a slight hill. People arrived, began to gather, obviously the word had gone out, from all directions. They sat or stood in silence. I remember the mother at the front whose child had died. She sat rocking herself. The man behind her stood alone without the woman that he had spent many, many years with. By this time I didn't understand very much of what was going on because we'd left Spanish and the Shuar have their own dialect. So I never grasped it in 2 weeks, not a single word. So what the chief did was he took his rattle. I don't think this is the one he gave me, although he did give me one. And he stood in the centre of the clearing and he opened the 4 directions, which I'm sure you've seen done in our culture. So I was working out earlier on the directions. I think this must be east because the sun was... Anyway, this is east. So what he did was call in the energies of the eagle and the condor. These are birds that fly high and see the bigger picture. Now this is a grief ceremony. So grief does move and change. So he asked for the energies of those birds to be present in our circle. And then he called east, south, to the south, where the sacred serpent lies. And the serpent, snake, sheds its skin and peels off what no longer serves. So that also had to be brought in to this space. And then he called to the west, where the sun sets. And this is the direction of powerful animals like the lion and the bear. And this is what we need. We need their strength. So he called in those animals. Lastly, he turned to the north, which is the direction of the hummingbird. And the hummingbird is the smallest bird. It lays the smallest eggs of any bird. I think you've probably seen its movements, very fast. And this represents joy. And also information that May wants to come in. And then he went down to Mother Earth, rattled around, and thanked Mother Earth for supporting us and for the feminine that she brings. And then he held his rattle up to the skies, which is the direction of our ancestors and the masculine spirit. So the scene was set for the grief prayers, and he talked about grief not only in Ecuador, not only in South America, but where grief was present in the world. And he sent out prayers to everyone in the world, blessing the grief, if you like. It was very touching. And very quietly at the end, people got up and carried on with the day. And I was there for that amazing ceremony. So, didn't like the beds, they were wooden and I had nothing to sleep on. That was a bit tricky, but I learnt so much from them. And of course the plants in the jungle are all pharmaceutical, non-pharmaceutical drugs. The red berries the women take for contraception. It goes on and on like that. Could give a whole talk on the jungle actually, that would be rather fun to do. So, loss, of course, is not always about the death of someone. Now this is where I'm going to need your input. Let's look at some other examples. And I'm going to, maybe, has anyone got good handwriting? Polly? Oh, great, thank you. So when we get a few suggestions, perhaps you'll just, in one word or something, or two, write them up here. Thank you. So, if you don't feel like talking about your own loss, then that's absolutely fine, of course, please, there's no pressure. But it is not always about death. It might be about an ending of some kind. A dog might die, and that dog, you think, well, how come that person's in grief, desperate? But that dog meant everything to the owner. Anyone brave enough?
I've got one.
Yes.
Childhood.
Childhood what?
Losing childhood.
Losing childhood, oh, that's an interesting one. Yeah. You might say more about that.
Yeah.
Yes. Alice?
Loss of a future with that person or that event.
Loss of a future, yes.
What would have happened?
What would have happened, yes. Fabulous, thank you. Yes.
Loss of your health.
Loss of your health, oh my goodness, yes.
Lose someone through a psychiatric illness, the person that's
Yes.
at work,
Yes,
and their potential for the future also.
yes, yes. So where there's mental ill health, emotional ill health.
Redundancy.
Redundancy, yes. The end of security, a job, social interaction, yes.
Just any way of life, like COVID has shown, sort of
Yes.
travelling or whatever was
Yes.
just taken for granted.
Yes, we'll talk about that. I'm going to come to that, but thank you for that. Anyone else?
I was going to say retirement, which is similar to redundancy.
Yes.
Youth.
Sorry, you were going to say?
Retirement.
Retirement, yes. Yes. All these demand adaptations, yes.
Loss of a relationship.
Yes! Loss of a relationship. And the more meaningful it was, the more heartache there is, of course.
Youthfulness.
Yes. Youth. We're such a, what's the word? Youth-focused culture, aren't we? That I remember when we left California after living there for a year, I just said, this is quite a few years ago, I don't want to grow old in California, that's for sure. Everyone around the lake where I was sitting they looked, they'd had tucks and lifts and their question to me was, well, what jobs have you had done? And I didn't know what they meant. And then the second question was, how many husbands have you had? And at the time I was still on number one, so I didn't do very well in that. That's great. Any more?
Yeah. Sorry, it just slipped my mind there when you with. Yeah, loss of purpose, like your children.
Yeah, loss of purpose. Oh yeah, the empty nest
Yeah.
stuff. Yes, yeah, I had that really badly. Yes.
And loss of status.
Yeah, can you give an example of that?
What is your identity? Who you identify as, or who you know?
In a job or
whether it's in a job
yes,
or whether it's in another way.
yes, yes, that's great.
Loss of freedom.
Yes, and I'm going to come on to that. Yes, that's a big one, isn't it?
And privacy. Privacy.
Sorry,
Loss of privacy.
loss of privacy. Oh, that's an interesting one. I hadn't thought of that.
Loss of friends in a
Yeah.
sort of group that
Yeah.
you hang out with. Again,
Yes.
probably pre-COVID or something.
Yeah. Gosh.
Financial loss.
Financial loss. Yes,
Scam or a robbery. Or
yes.
Loss of memory.
Loss of memory. Yes. And of course, how it impacts on family members when that happens. Yeah.
Sentimental value things, sort of if there was a file, whatever, letters, photographs, that sort of thing.
Yes. So when personal things that we value are destroyed or lost or whatever, yeah, that can be quite a loss.
For me, footage from certain places, interviewing indigenous tribes, for example, and if you think you've lost your footages, you can never get that back. The magic of that moment
Yeah.
is gone forever.
Yeah. Would anyone else like to put something else in the pot?
We have so many refugees now in the world.
Yes.
Loss of your home.
Yes. Loss of home. Loss of an identity with where they're living. Yes. Yes. That's a massive one.
yeah, loss of community as well.
Yes.
I've noticed it so much that what community is like when I was young.
Yeah. I've noticed that big time. We take out the welcome.
You're welcome.
You're still welcome. Yeah, loss of community. Oh, yes. Yeah, I remember about 3 months after Jasmine had died, and I'd only just moved to the area, and the woman opposite, very lovely couple, came over with a card and said, "I am so sorry for your loss. If ever you want to come in for a cup of tea, just let me know." And I found Sundays very difficult. And this was one particular Sunday, and I thought, there's no cars there, there's no family there, maybe it's okay if I knock on the door, and I just wanted to talk, someone to talk to. So I knocked on the door, and her grandson appeared, and he was quite little, gaps in the teeth and all that, and she held him in front of her and said, "I'm so sorry," but no, she didn't say "I'm so sorry." She said, "I'm sorry, this isn't a very good time," and closed the door. So, well, you can understand how I felt mortified, and I thought, I'm never going to speak to them again, never. Anyway, I went down into Nailsworth, where I live, and decided to take a bus back because my energy was pretty low, and there she was sitting on the seat. So I decided to go and sit next to her. And I said, "There has been some easing of the anguish." And she said, "Oh, I'm glad." And then she told me how her daughter had died when she was only 4 years old. And I got it. I got why she couldn't let me in. Because my grief would have triggered any unresolved grief in her, and she couldn't face it. So that was a huge lesson for me. Yeah, we never know, do we, what people have experienced or are experiencing. Thanks, Polly. Anyone else got something?
Loss of species and loss of ecosystems.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Thank you.
That's loss of a physical ability, say after a stroke or
Yes.
losing one sight or
Yes.
ability to walk.
Yes. Absolutely. And I've just heard from somebody that she is grieving for the child she never had. And she's 65, and that sense of loss is only just surfacing after all these years, but at least it is, and she's recognising it.
Yes, like my sister had, she did have 2 children, but in between that she had a lot of miscarriages and she lost both of her fallopian tubes over the course of that time. And she, she said, I hate it when people say that she's got 2 healthy children. She said, because my choice has been taken away from me, that I could never have another one, but people think it's okay because I've already got 2 children.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not understanding that my choice
Yes.
yeah, is no longer there.
Yes.
Well, my sister lost 7 embryos through IVF.
Yes.
Finally
I know
yes.
someone else who's,
Yeah.
and yeah,
So disappointment.
disappointment.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you want to say, what do you mean by that?
Well, you know, the people who haven't had the children they wanted,
Yes.
or lost the children they had,
Yes.
or, and certainly at the end of a marriage, there's a lot of disappointment.
Yes.
Huge amounts of
Yes.
disappointment.
And maybe
And
resentment.
loss of status too.
Yes. Yes. I remember the sense of shame that was attached to the label
The
of
word
divorce.
shame must come into everything.
Yes. Yes. Anything
In our
else?
culture we try to create certainty, don't we? We try to ignore the fact that uncertainty is always there.
Yes. Could you just say that again? Felt quite important. Say that again.
In our culture, we try to create certainty, don't we?
We try
We're
to
very
create
attached-
certainty.
Yeah, we're very attached to certainty.
That's an interesting idea. Thank you. Yes.
And once that certainty's been knocked, it's like our world is not the world we thought it was, like it's out of
Yes.
kilter.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
This may not be quite Oliver, but when you're sort of a phone-in interest between one person and another, how does that work? I mean, you know, they're miles away, and I mean, it might be completely out of order, but it does seem to me that, you know, the touching of a people or whatever is not there.
Yes. 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 Gosh, yes. Thank you for that point. We will be touching on the question of touch. Yeah. Oh my goodness, I need to walk on with this. Right, I think that's all we'll put in the pot, and you can add something yourself if you want. Let's look at, perhaps more briefly, the losses we experienced in lockdown. And I think I might read these out because just looking at the time, we had loss of freedoms. So many losses of freedoms. We had regulations imposed on us, and somebody mentioned the lack of certainty. There was no certainty about almost anything. People died alone in hospitals. I had 3 women in one of the Writing Through Grief groups who had the most indescribable guilt that they let their husband, in this case a husband, drive off in an ambulance while they stayed at home because they were not allowed to go with him. Oh my goodness, the guilt, the grief. It put a new slant on it. I could say a lot more about that. Women giving birth on their own. God. Funerals were impacted. Weddings were cancelled. Playgrounds were closed. I'd almost forgotten these things because it's a while back, but I haven't. And the loss of touch. I remember going out into the field opposite, and a woman was sitting on the bench, and she looked utterly dejected. And I sat at the other end because, that's what you do. And she said my 2 grandchildren, who I used to see twice a week, they would come up, and one would sit on my knee, and the other would want to play. And she says, now they come to the window and wave at me. I mean, I nearly wept at her distress. I think I did cry actually with her. The lack of social contact. I remember my own sense of panic in my own garden. It's quite high fencing. And I was in the garden and I suddenly had a panic and I just thought, where is this going? And I need a conversation. I need a conversation. And I went out to the front and Nathan, my neighbour, was there. I said, Nathan, talk to me. I need a conversation. And he very kindly started talking about the car or something, or whatever it was. And it was perfect, absolutely perfect. I just needed to give myself time just to reduce the panic. Oh, when we come together, we what's called co-regulate. Yeah, you've heard of the term. I didn't, and you, Polly, yes. You see, I hadn't had come across this before, but it's sort of neuroscience. And Polly runs yoga classes, which are very, very lovely and it is all about co-regulating, so that if somebody is a bit wired up, a bit panic, you don't have to do very much, you just stay calm. Or you might do a small movement. And that other person or people begin, their levels of panic reduce. It's absolutely fascinating. So the levels of fear were very high, and to some extent they still are. What happens when we are made to feel fearful is the fear levels go up, and then given time they should, and hopefully not too long, they should come down to a base level here. But if there's more fear, like you watch the news or something, and the fear goes up and it drops down a little bit higher. And this goes on. And so the fear never drops down to a healthy level if it goes on for too long. So how does this impact us? It results in this high arousal level in the body. Many people were lost in fear. The body can't sustain this. The kidneys get overworked and there is exhaustion. Has anyone experienced that or seen someone, witnessed someone in that state? Yeah. A health conference held in Bath recently, last month, was called The Better Way. Speakers from all around the world came. And in one of the talks it was suggested that 1 in 10 people have been left with chronic kidney disease caused by the fear, the levels of fear. Kidney insufficiency is even present in children. So I'd like to end on an upbeat note and just look at how can we reduce fear levels. I think turning off the news is probably a good idea. Getting out into nature, gardens if we're fortunate to have them. As soon as we're out in nature, our immune systems reboot, augment. The other thing is, like all our feelings and responses, it's a really good idea to get to know fear and to recognise what it is, where it is, and how it's playing out in our bodies. In other words, meet it and allow it. Ah, it's you again. Maybe talk to it. Talk to fear. I know you. Has it got a colour? Is there a texture about it? Does it come in through the ground and fill your sense of yourself? Does it come from on high and stop at the head, perhaps? It would be different. It's quite an interesting thing to compare and contrast with each other. Anyone got any idea about that? About where does the fear sit in your body? when it comes, because it will come at different times. Any idea? Polly, any idea about that? When fear comes?
For me, I would say it's kind of solar plexus.
Solar plexus.
In the bottom of my ribs.
Okay.
It can feel very sore, or it can feel like I'm tight.
Yes, yeah, I think I can relate to that. Yeah. Anyone else?
For me, it's on the left-hand side,
Ah.
not in my face, and then a little bit kind of down my
Ah.
arm, and I get tingling in my, again, this left-hand side.
Yeah. Well, you've got terrific awareness to know where it sits in the body. So we're halfway there when we have that.
Jaw.
Where?
Jaw.
The jaw, yes. That's a very common place, isn't it? Yeah.
By the lower back.
Yes.
Where the kidneys are.
Yes. Yeah.
Shoulders.
Shoulders, yes.
And the gut.
And the gut. Yeah.
And your heart.
And the heart. Yes. Yes. Boom, 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 boom. Absolutely.
And your lungs, because you don't breathe properly.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyone got anywhere else? Big toe, leg, anything? Karen, anywhere in particular in your body?
I think it had been said.
Okay, okay. So what we can do with this is pushing it away is not probably going to help it. So bringing it into our awareness, recognizing it in the body and soothing it. Soothing the body with touch is fantastic. And I don't know if you've had a rhythmical massage here ever in St. Luke's. Poor, I recommend it. So slow rhythmical massage reduces fear levels. Hugging a person for at least 12 seconds apparently helps to calm the body. It's quite a long time when you count to 12 seconds. Meditate, even if it's only 5 minutes a day. That will calm the body. Practices like, what do you call your yoga? Slow yoga? You've got to give it a name, Polly. It's really slow movement. It's so powerful. I hadn't really experienced that before, but wow, very powerful. Qigong, Tai Chi, soothes the body. Reduces the fear levels. So I'm going to bring this to a close by saying that each of us is truly amazing. You have probably never been told how amazing you are. We can do anything, especially when we do it together. Let's keep on shining our light on the darkness. We can create a better world. Of that I have no doubt at all. Thank you all for coming. So Bernard, we finished on time. How about that?
Thank you very much. I think that was a wonderful way of kind of opening up the whole subject, really, of everything to do with health, and what I hope we can have more discussion about then in the second part of this evening. So I think it's tremendous. Also, just to bear in mind that that one has to think beyond just simply the physical material world, but also there's a spiritual world there which is supporting, and we can find a way of relating to that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
indeed.